What I thought I'd share for a few moments this afternoon is some of the highlights of archaeology at Andrews University. Believe it or not, we've had archaeology going for more than 60 years, actually, going back to the late 1960s. I was talking to Robert Little, who was trying to go on one of those digs, I think in 1970, but that was when the war broke out. I've heard the stories from Siegfried's side. It was quite exciting. They had everybody coming, some were trapped in Istanbul and other places. He was in, I thought, Jerusalem, and he literally escaped. That was in still Jordan at that time, and he had to go over the hill, I know the hill well, and head down into the Jordan Valley to get to Amman. And on his way down, he could see or hear the bullets zinging off the asphalt of the road as he was heading. They weren't shooting at him necessarily. Bullets were flying all over the place. I actually know people on both sides of that battle. One of my Jordanian colleagues, archaeologists, her father was in the battle, and he was actually on the walls of Jerusalem fighting for the Jordanian army until they finally got pushed out by the Israelis. And of course, I have many Israeli contacts who were fighting on the other side. So it's a very contentious part of the world, and just about when you think things are going to settle down, another war breaks out. I think I've been over there 2 or 3 times when a war broke out. Even last summer, we had our team in Jordan. I was working in Sicily, which is much more peaceful. You only have the mafioso to contend with. You don't have all the terrorists. And so they were there when the missiles started flying over. They could see the contrails of the missiles heading into Israel from, see, that was Iran again. I got to keep track of all the countries in the wars. And so some of them wanted to get out of the country. I had a few coming to Sicily, so it was quite a ordeal to try and get out of Jordan. All the airlines were shutting down. People were trying to sneak off to Saudi Arabia and do a roundabout way through Egypt and then get back to Europe or United States. So this summer, the team is going again. They're hoping that the current, what we call it, ceasefire will hold and that there won't be any serious fighting again. So we have our team just south of Amman at a site called Safra, which is an early Israelite site, we think. And we're finding some exciting things there. Nearby, we found an Israelite temple, a sanctuary actually, at a site called Otterot, which is also mentioned in the Bible. So we've had a lot of exciting ongoing projects. So I thought what I would do, Christy Curbs, I'm sorry about this. This is Andrews University, so I'm not including Dor. She was actually, when I was a very young archaeologist, she was there along with, was it a sister cousin? I know you had 2 or 3 people traveling with you. And we met in Israel and Jerusalem, I guess, and I remember touring around the first day, and then you were there for a few weeks working at Tel Dor, which is near Mount Carmel, actually, not too far from Haifa, just north of Caesarea, or Caesarea, as they say over there. And it was the capital of the 4th district of King Solomon. Since those days, they've actually found a lot of very important things. The site's been thoroughly published. Cousins of the Philistines were living at Dor. They found that they call them the Checker. They're one of several tribes of sea peoples, the Philistines being one of those. And Christy was one, not my very first season, but was probably like my second or third. So we were all young kids at that time, and that was fun. But I'm going to share with you some of the highlights. I came to Andrews University about 1985, 1986. They gave me some plaque saying I've been hanging around for 40 years. When am I going to leave? So anyway, I guess I've been here for a while, and they're letting me still play around in the museum right now. So we'll celebrate the 60 years going back to Siegfried Horn. This picture, actually, I kind of cherish it. It's me and Siegfried at a lecture at the seminary. I was sitting on the front row. I don't remember whether I was speaking or he was speaking. We were both speaking, but we were having a good time sharing stories. It was my privilege to succeed him. In between was Larry Garrity, not insignificant person, but I inherited the Institute of Archaeology after Siegfried established it many, many years ago in the 1960s, and that's why he was fleeing Jerusalem. It was the Heshbon dig, Heshbon, very important site when they couldn't find any evidence for the walls that came tumbling down at Jericho at that time. There's been more research since then. Siegfried thought, I wonder if there's another site we could explore. He had just finished his PhD. He had studied at Johns Hopkins University under the distinguished William F. Albright, one of the most famous American archaeologists, Syro-Palestinian or biblical archaeologists, really in a way the father of biblical archaeology in America. He had his career through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Siegfried hooked up with him after he got out of prison camp in World War II, and he studied with William Albright, and after a term or two, William Albright told Siegfried Horn, the Adventist pioneer of archaeology, he said, "You know everything. Why are you studying with me? You're interested in the Exodus. Why don't you go to the University of Chicago and study Egyptology?" So Siegfried Horn left the Syro-Palestinian archaeology program, and Johns Hopkins went to Chicago and got his PhD there. And then, of course, he came to the seminary and started the archaeology program there. So that goes back about 60 years. And he asked everybody, as he finished his degree and was going to start the very first Seventh-day Adventist project ever in the field, run by an Adventist institution, Andrews University, he asked all the leading scholars at that time, if there's one site that you think should be dug that would help illuminate the biblical story, what would it be? And all these professors, including Albright, G. Ernest Dry, all these very famous people most of us wouldn't know about, but they were big in their day, giants in the land, and they wrote out a list of about 20 suggestions, a whole bunch of them. I think there were about 20 scholars sent Siegfried suggestions. On everybody's list was Heshbon, the site that Sihon of Heshbon, he was defeated by the Israelites just before they went into the Jordan Valley and attacked Jericho, where the walls came tumbling down. Since Jericho wasn't producing any usable evidence, they thought if you dig at Heshbon, maybe you'll find the battle between Sihon of Heshbon. That's the Hebrew name. Heshbon is the Arabic name, so sometimes I forget and switch back and forth. If you dig there at Sihon's Heshbon, maybe you'll find evidence of the conquest story. It's very famous in the book of Numbers. So that's how Andrews University and Adventists got involved. Siegfried did dig there, but like Jericho, he initially didn't find any evidence of the conquest at the time, late Bronze Age, around 1400 BC, that it was supposed to be there. And so Siegfried wrote his reports. He was a German, very meticulous, wrote his reports on time, a lot of detail. And he admitted, we searched for this, we're hoping to find evidence for the conquest. We didn't find it. People were surprised at that because he said those Seventh-day Adventists are kind of conservative people, and they probably are biased towards the Bible. They may try and fudge the data, and make an excuse or something. But Siegfried was very honest. He said, he didn't deny that he believed in the story, but he said, I can't find evidence after about 3 seasons of excavation. And he published it very thoroughly and scientifically. And so that gained us incredible credibility in the scholarly world because they said the Adventists seem to be honest people. And so even though they believe in the Bible, they don't lie. And so that gave us a lot of scholarly credibility, and that put Andrews University on the map for archaeology, and we've enjoyed the fruits of Siegfried's honesty all these years. Since then, new work has been done, and we're not so sure that Heshbon isn't the right place because when you dig an archaeological site, they're very big, and we've discovered you can put your trench in one place, not find any evidence you're looking for, and it's 5 feet away in the next little mound. So we've learned to be more cautious in pronouncing things either to the positive or to the negative unless you've got real solid evidence. So anyway, this picture kind of represents it. I may have more pictures about Heshbon as we kind of move through. Why do Seventh-day Adventists do archaeology? Now, I'm sure some Adventists will have different goals, different ideas, different reasons. Some dig just for the fun of it and to find treasure. I hate to say that, but there's always that allure of finding things from the past, sort of an Indiana Jones kind of an attitude. He says that belongs in a museum, but then he's out there stealing things all over the place, So you try and make those things go together. My students even gave me a plaque, a name plaque, Randall, Younker, PhD, obtainer of rare antiquities. That's Indiana Jones' title. So we don't really do that. We do scientific excavation. And our concern, of course, and interest is not really in just finding treasure, as much fun as that can be. We are doing it because we are Christians, and we believe that Christians should pursue, as I wrote on the screen here, excellence in scholarship, because God, I believe, expects our best. We shouldn't be shoddy scholars. We shouldn't be lazy scholars. We shouldn't be bending the data to fit our desired conclusions. We need to be honest. At the same time, that doesn't mean we have to give up our faith. I actually wrote these out, 7 Andrews Principles, and it got a lot of good play in the scholarly literature, and it's been cited by many people, the Andrews way of doing archaeology. I'll come back to that a little bit later on. I also think we do archaeology because it can uphold, when we're successful in our historic interest, the integrity of God's Word. A lot of people are very negative about the Bible. Like I talked about this morning, Daniel didn't exist. Daniel didn't write those prophecies. Those things are not true. And yet, has several scholars, including Yagiel Yadin. Yagiel Yadin, the famous Israeli archaeologist, wrote, after a career successful famous career in archaeology, said, I haven't found any serious archaeological discovery that disproves the Bible. In other words, for him, and I can cite many other archaeologists like G. Ernest Wright and so forth, after all these years, it seems like we found more in favor of the Bible, supporting the existence of people, supporting the existence of places, supporting the existence of battles. This just keeps coming up out of the ground, out of the ground, out of the ground, so that we're finding that there is a reliable historical core, even for the non-believer in there. You can't deny that, particularly for the Old Testament and the divided monarchy, we have found almost every single king the Bible mentions in the ground with his name on a seal or on an inscription or something else like that, and confirmation of various battles like the Battle of Lachish. We have dramatic evidence that correlates well with the biblical account in Kings. So it helps uphold the integrity of God. Also, it helps us preach, I think, the good news more effectively. Of course, this is a little selfish on my part, but we require all the ministerial students at the seminary have to take one biblical archaeology class, because we think the more you know about the context of the biblical world, and I see the pastors giving me a thumbs up, give that guy an A, and that context can help you be a lot more accurate and help you understand the Bible itself. In fact, even Bill Deaver, my major professor, who is another famous guy in his own right, he's now 92 years old, still kicking, he said that there are two usual biblical languages we talk about, Hebrew and Greek. There's Aramaic too, but we won't talk about that. There's Greek and Hebrew, but he said the third language is archaeology. And archaeology is valuable because it is the material realia that we dig out of the ground that's contemporary with the biblical people and the biblical stories, the biblical events. That's our only window really directly into the past. Everything else is hearsay, books, Greek historians well after the times, medieval historians and all of that. But archaeology puts you right there. So for that reason, we have had our ministerial students take it, and we hope that they use it and preach the good news more effectively. I know some do, and we hope that others will as well. And it helps us, I think, win souls for the kingdom of God. So these are reasons why at least Seventh-day Adventists do archaeology, and other Christian schools too, but there's not very many of them. A lot of the Christian schools, and Bill Deaver wrote an article about this in Christianity Today a couple decades ago. He said everybody's quitting biblical archaeology except the Seventh-day Adventists. And he says the reason they're staying with it is because they take the Bible seriously. Now, Bill Deaver was known as the dark prince of biblical archaeology. He was a skeptic. But he had so many Adventists, I think, contaminated him, and he started having respect for Adventists through Siegfried Horn. He knew Larry Garrity, and he knew all of us. I was his student. We had Michael Hosel was his student. And so he started realizing that we do good work, and we actually do that because we love the Bible, we take it seriously. And if we tell an effective story, we can help win souls for God. And of course, in our own tradition with Ellen White, she makes some very important comments about the reliability, the importance of the historical reliability of the Bible. She writes, for example, I think this is Acts of the Apostles. You notice I'm putting on my glasses more and more. In contradiction of the growing historical critical movement within biblical scholarship of the 19th century, Ellen White maintained that the Bible contained, quotes, authentic histories of actual individuals. So when it talks about a Daniel, she says that's an authentic history about an actual individual. That's volume 4 of the Testimonies. And she rejected higher criticism that, in her words, destroys Scripture, has divine revelation. So generally, traditionally, most Adventist scholars have accepted this as a working premise, and we have a few that don't, even within our church, but I think most of us, and certainly at the Institute of Archaeology and the Old Testament department, all the departments, we take the historicity of the Bible seriously. We believe that our theology as Adventists is based upon an understanding of historical reality. And if that history is stripped away, our theology actually crumbles. Really nothing we believe, including the Sabbath, certainly the sanctuary and most of our other beliefs. If you strip away the historical reality of those stories that the theology is based on, the theology collapses, boom. And so you can't have your cake and eat it too in this case. If you strip away the history, you no longer have any viable doctrines. Devotion to the Bible is another reason. This historical context was partly behind Ellen White's statements that God would quotes, have a people upon the earth to maintain the Bible, and the Bible only has the standard of all doctrines and the basis of all reforms. And this has been my main theme all the way through, is to uphold the integrity of the Bible. I think if we can at least do that, other problems will find their solutions eventually if we take God's word seriously. Here's some of the projects the Institute of Archaeology has done. We have excavations, surveys, publications, conferences, museum, of course the Institute. We have, these aren't all of them. We've dug the Heshbon site, Tel Gezer in Israel, Solomon site. I'll talk about that more later. Tel Jalul, which I think is ancient Bezer, a Levitical city. We've been digging that for 20 years. We're now working on the final publications. Currently, we have a team at Safra, which is in Jordan, overlooking the Dead Sea. That's an early Israelite settlement site. Now, don't let this get out of this room, because the Jordan government doesn't like me to say that. They actually made me come over and apologize. Not me so much, one of my colleagues, but I gave them some support. We have a site, we've been surveying Mount Judy, one of the Noah's Ark sites on the border of Syria and Turkey. And of course, we've been surveying in the Ararat region, as I mentioned this morning. Publications, we have a whole series on books, scientific publications in Heshbon. Tel El Umeri, south of Amman, another one of our sites. We've thoroughly published that. I think there's at least 11 volumes out. Jalul's currently in publication process. I excavated a Paleo-Christian site, still doing it at San Michele, St. Michael's, the earliest Christian church in Sicily. We've made some incredible discoveries there. I'll talk about those more in a moment. And of course, we have some software preliminary reports. And we wrote a book on Madaba. That's an Old Testament town near where we stay in Jordan. On the whole history. It was published in French, Arabic, and English. And I think I'll talk more about that in a moment. That's an interesting story, how we got involved with that. And of course, we have publications about Mount Ararat, Noah's Ark. I think we produced something like 6 or 7 books. One of them is a very large book, based mostly on conferences we've been having over in Turkey with international scholars, mostly Turkish, but we get people from Europe, United States, and otherwise. We have another conference. I will be a co-chair for it. It will be in October 15 and 16 in Ari, which is a town near Mount Ararat. So we'll be gathering scholars there as well. So we have these conferences with American schools of, used to be called Oriental Research. We had a conference in the Louvre in Paris. I helped head that up, the Sorbonne, a major university in France. We've had, of course, the Horn Lecture Series regularly. We've had meetings in the country of Georgia. And we've had countries in Sicily, conferences, and of course, Ari. Our museum has nearly 9,000 artifacts. We have vaults, collections, records. We have a Salemi exhibit that's in Sicily, actually. It's a permanent exhibit. They liked our work so much, they gave us 3 rooms of the museum, and we have a permanent exhibit on Andrews University's excavations of early Christianity. I'm kind of pleased with that. We give talks here, and of course, it's a Catholic country. I occasionally will have priests in the audience. We've had the local bishop, and somebody sent a copy of one of our publications to one of the teaching monsignors at the Vatican, and he wanted us to come and lecture to the Catholic priests about early Christianity. And so that was kind of an interesting experience there. And of course, then we have all the facilities here at Andrews with offices, museum, libraries, labs, classroom, maps, and dig collection. We've got hundreds of boxes of all the goodies we've dug up over the last 60 years are stored in the basement. The Ark of the Covenant is not there. People wonder about that. Yeah, and some people got so mad they call us the Little Horn Museum because we're not giving them what they want, which has a uniquely Adventist connotation, but we reject that claim. One of our major research sites is over in Jordan, and you can see this is the land of Ammon to the east, to the right of the Dead Sea. You can see the blue there, and the river, the Arnon River, and so forth. That white circle, the yellow circle, is actually the heart of the Ammonite territory. Adventists have been working there so long, working with the Ammonites, that they refer to us as the Seventh-day Ammonites, okay, as opposed to Seventh-day Adventists. They know that we're there. We have good relationship with the government. In fact, because of our conservative lifestyle, when Jordanian students, particularly female students, need to go on a dig to get experience, they send them to us because we don't drink, we don't smoke, we behave ourselves, and they feel that their women are safe with Adventists as opposed to some other groups. Here's the first site that I was just talking about with Siegfried Horn. These are some photographs from an airplane that were shot by, I'm trying to think of the guy's name now, several years ago. But this is Siegfried's site. It's right smack in the center. It's overlooking towards the southeast, the Madaba Plains area. And we've been working there as Adventists for, I think we just hit maybe 60 years for that project. I helped with a book, and it just came to my desk a few days ago. So we've been Hesban, Jalul, Umeri, Safra, all these sites are in this area, and again, they're dominated mostly by Adventist excavation teams. So this is where Siegfried started work. He thought it to be biblical Heshbon of Sion, the site conquered by Israel before. Siegfried was very good about publishing. This was his first publication, Heshbon, 1968. He used the Andrews University Seminary studies to quickly publish reports. This rapid publication, because archaeologists are not known for fast publication, helped put Adventist archaeological scholarship on the academic map. This is a book that came out after 25 years, obviously, summarizing all the research we'd done to that time. That was, again, many years ago. This is our first site of Heshbon of Sion. Sten LaBianco over at the seminary, he's retired now, but he headed up the final publication series. I forget how many books we have in it, probably 15, 18 books. This is his archaeological survey, and these have really put, again, our scholarly research on the map. This is the Madaba Plains Project publication, a different series. Dr. Paul Ray is here. He's unfortunately just retiring, I think, next month. He's had some health issues. And we're all getting closer to retirement age. We hate to admit that, but he's done a great job in getting a lot of these books out. This is our most recent book, just came actually. It's 50 years. I was wondering if it was 60 or 50. It's 50 years. I don't need to add years prematurely. And this summarizes all the Adventist work at the major sites in this general area. So this just give you an idea of how we are involved as Adventists in scholarship, and it's important because I think it gives credibility to Adventism in general, and it helps our theologians in that they can point to serious biblical research that gives greater credibility to what they're saying about the Bible. So I think it can be helpful in that regard. Here's another book. This is the 40-year book and so forth. This is a site that I directed excavations at. I think it's biblical Bezer, a Levitical city. It's called Jalul, right in the middle. I think we have preliminary drafts of almost all the chapters. We hope the book will come out in the next year or so. And you can see the excavation fields there. We found all sorts of, we found an Israelite house, a 4-room house. We found a tripartite building. We found a Moabite sacred area full of pottery and other things. We think it was a worship area when the Moabites controlled this area. The Ammonites, Moabites, and Israelites alternately controlled this particular site, and we find evidence of them as we go down through the layers of their pottery and even their inscriptions. So it's been a very fruitful and interesting excavation. Here's some of the phasing that we found. You know, this is typical of an archaeological site. We have material from the time of Abraham. That's the early Bronze Age, going back to about 2200 BC. We have stuff from the patriarchal period in Phils, a lot of pottery. We have stuff from the Israelite settlement period in Jordan, the Reubenites, for example. Iron Age 1A, Iron Age 1B. These are technical terms. They correlate with chronology. And then we've got the Gadites there, and then we've got the Moabites there, and then we've got the Ammonites. This just gives you an idea as we're digging down deeper through the layers as we go through the material, culture, and inscriptions of different people. And so it gives us some great insight into biblical history. It gives us the context for these stories. An interesting story, when we first started digging at Jalul, I had worked to get the permission. It was going to be my first big dig. I was quite excited. I was going to be the director of this great big site you just saw pictures of. And I'm trying to think what our season was, about 1992 or thereabouts. Probably the right year will pop up in a second. But I went to the government. I got the permission. I got the permit, signed an official government letterhead by His Royal Majesty, King Hussein at that time. He was the king that was alive. And we were excited. We got local permission. I talked to a local Sheikh German from the village of Jalul. He said, I'll give you some men to help you work, you know, and we had everything arranged. So we went to the site. We laid out all the excavation squares with string. Everything was carefully measured. We had all of our tools, our buckets and our shovels, tent to protect things, and everything was all set. And we just started digging, and suddenly, I don't know if I've got a picture here. It'll come up in a moment, perhaps. I saw a Mercedes-Benz car, an expensive one, coming from the east, from the desert, driving across the desert, not on a road. There is a paved road nearby, but he was driving right across the desert, right to my site. Now, at that time, we were so isolated, they were worried about our safety. Maybe the Bedouin tribes would attack us or something. It wasn't a real risk, but they were concerned. So the Jordanian had military policemen who were keeping an eye on us. They'd come by and check on us and so forth, you know. But here this guy was driving in this car like Yehu, the mad chariot driver, you know, and in a very expensive car. And he came right up to the side of the tell, a big mound of occupation layers. You saw the picture of it. He drove the car right up the side of that hill. That was quite impressive. And then he stopped right in the middle of our excavation area. I don't know if I have the picture. I'm going to look quick. No, I don't have it here. I have so many presentations. And as I saw the car stop, there was a young driver in the front seat. He was driving the car. And in the back was this man, actually, very distinguished-looking gentleman. And he got out of the car. I could tell from his demeanor and the way he was acting. He spoke English, and he said, "What's going on here?" You know, I was in the middle of that site that you saw. And so I walked over to him, and I said, well, we're doing an archaeological excavation here. "Who said you could do that?" I said, "Well, I have a letter from the king. I have my permit there with the official letterhead, you know, of the palace and all of that." And I said, "Well, I have permission from the king." He looked at me and said, "Even the king has to get permission when you're on private land." And I said, "Oh?" I said, "Well, I have talked to the head of the sheikh here. His name is Sheikh German." And this gentleman looked at me and said, Sheikh German. He's a zero." And I thought, oh, so he's not the man to get permission from. So I said, "Well, if you don't mind me asking, who are you?" He stood to his full height, put his thumb on his chest, and he said, "I am General Akash Azeb." Turned out he was the highest general in the Jordanian army. He wasn't in his uniform, but that's why he had a chauffeur driving him around. And he said, "And I own this land." I didn't know that. That's at first I found out about it. And he said, "If you would have come to me, I would have given you water for your people. I would have given you food. I would have given you shelter. I would have taken care." Now, this is the typical Bedouin tradition, the culture. He said, "I would have taken care of you if you would have come to me." And he said, "And who are you?" I said, "Well, I'm Randall, Younker, Professor Younker from Andrews University." He says, "You should ask permission." So when I realized what had happened, I immediately apologized. I said, "Well, please forgive me. I did not know you were the owner, and I'm very sorry. I was misinformed, but since this is your land, I would like to ask your permission to dig on your land." That's all I did. And he looked at me, smiled, and said, "Permission granted." He just wanted to be asked. And so then we had some friendly conversation. He invited my whole team over for dinner. He had a house out in the desert, actually. His main home was in Amman. And so things were going well. He actually thought our site was biblical Heshbon, and we had a very interesting discussion about that. We'll come back to him more later on. Well, the next day, his car comes across the desert again. And I thought, well, what does he want now? He drives right up the tell. There's a young man driving the car, his driver, and he's in the back seat. But there's a young lady, about 20 years old, very pretty lady. She was wearing an American baseball cap with a ponytail sticking out the back. It looked very modern, you know. And he goes out of the car, he opens her door, takes her by the hand, and he comes up to me and says, "Professor Younker, this is my daughter, Sabal." And I said, "Well, I'm very happy to meet you, Sabal." And General Zebin was very happy. He said, "I want you to know she's studying archaeology at Jordan University." And I said, "Well, that's wonderful." And then he said, "Professor Younker, can my daughter, Sabal, dig on your project?" I said, "Of course, we'd be happy to have Sabal come and dig with us on our project." Then he took her by the hand, and he put her hand in my hand and said, "Professor Younker, this is my cherished daughter. I want you to take care of her." And I remember thinking, none of these Andrews young men are getting near this girl. Because this is a matter of Arab tribal pride. And so she came and worked on our project. She ultimately would come to Andrews to work on her master's degree, and just last summer she finished her PhD. at Andrews University in archaeology, and you'll see her picture a little bit later on because she traveled with us to Saudi Arabia to be our translator, actually. So we had many wonderful encounters through the years. In the end, he passed away, but he left in his will a note saying that we were to have permanent access to the site for as long as we wanted to dig it. So that was a very nice gift. Now, here's the rest of the story. There's a lot more to this story that gives you an insight what goes on at Andrews Institute of Archaeology. When this same man was younger, during the post-World War II period, 1947, he was serving in under the British, actually. They had just made an independent country of Jordan in the late 1920s. If you've ever heard of Lawrence of Arabia and Winston Churchill, they carved up the Middle East and they created the new kingdom of Jordan. It had never existed before. It was always part of Palestine and Syria. But now the British made a new country, and they put their own people, British people, in charge of the Antiquities Department and various government ministries, with the idea they would eventually turn them over to the Jordanians. So there was a British general, Gleb Pasha, I believe was his name, and there was a British head of archaeology. His name was Lancaster Harding. And in that year, people were starting to hear rumors that over across the Jordan River, across the Dead Sea, people were finding ancient scrolls. And these ancient scrolls found near the Dead Sea were making their way up by Bedouin to Bethlehem initially. Word started getting out, and people started exploring this. It turned out that these Bedouin had discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Israelis quickly got in the game to buy these for the new state of Israel that came into existence in 1947, 1948. These would prove that Israel had been a Jewish land in ancient times. So it was a political use of archaeology. The Jordanians quickly caught on to that, and the British head of archaeology said, look, this area where they're digging is maybe in Jordan's land. They have no right to take those scrolls to Jerusalem, to Israel. And this caused quite a ruckus. And so Lancaster Harding came to Captain Akash Zebin, the same man, the father of my student later on. And he said, there's scrolls being found down by the Dead Sea. I want you to find out where they're coming from. At that time, they didn't know about the caves or where they were coming from. And so Captain Zebin went down there with a contingent of Jordanian soldiers. This is a new story, by the way. I heard it from his lips and from his daughter, Sabal. It's only recently been published. For years, nobody knew who found this Dead Sea Scroll caves. They gave credit to other people, but it was General Zebin that actually found the caves. He went down there with the soldiers, and since he was Jordanian and he was Arab and he spoke the Bedouin dialect, he asked the local people who found these scrolls and where are the caves. They told him. And so he was the one that actually came back, told the Jordanian government where they were. By then, the Israelis had already made off with a lot of the scrolls, and they ended up in the Jerusalem Museum. Some ended up in the Rockefeller Museum. But the man who discovered the caves and additional scrolls from the Dead Sea was this man right here, a father of one of our Andrews University students. How about that? It's funny how the circles come around and how we get connected. These are the caves of the Dead Sea. And here's some of the scrolls. A couple of the scrolls that were found ended up in the Jordan Museum. They're called the copper scrolls because instead of being made of leather parchment, somebody had carved the text into the copper. They had it pounded in. That was very unusual. What was this scroll talking about? Well, it's called the treasure scroll. Why? Because just before the Romans came to Jerusalem, the local people, maybe the Essenes down by the Dead Sea, they wanted to hide both their Bibles or scrolls and also their gold, their wealth. And so they picked special places around Jerusalem to hide bags of coins, whatever. It's quite a considerable amount of money, different locations. And the copper scroll, they had revealed the secret locations of all this treasure. And the idea was after the Romans left, they would go back and get the treasure. So they had a permanent map, a written map on these scrolls. Well, they never came back for the treasure. And the scrolls were found while Captain Zebin was in charge of the expedition. And they are on exhibit now in the museum in Amman. I've often thought, I remember Steven Spielberg saying, well, we've already found the Ark of the Covenant, we found the golden cup of Christ, there's nothing more exciting to find. And I've thought, you don't know about the treasure of the scrolls. That would make a great movie, and it's a true story, unlike the other stories, but no one's picked up on that. So maybe when I retire, I'll write the story of the treasure scrolls, and written on copper. This is General Zebin when he was a young man. He was the personal aide. He was not only head of the Jordanian army, he was personally the aide for the King Hussein, and you see him in all these pictures here. He's very high up. He told me once, you may remember Gaddafi from Libya. He was kind of a troublemaker in the Middle East, and he tried to bully other people, including King Hussein. They were having a summit meeting. Gaddafi was in there swaggering around, threatening people, talking big. And he came up to King Hussein, who's a short man, so is his son Abdullah. And Gaddafi was towering over him and threatening him that he needed to do what Gaddafi said. And General Zebin, who was standing next to the king, he said, "Your Majesty, would you like me to shoot him now or later?" He had his pistol. And the king says, "No, we don't need to do that now." And Gaddafi backed off. He didn't realize how serious these people were. Don't mess with the king. You don't mess with the king. And I heard that story again from them. So he met the Pope. He met all the world dignitaries at that time. And this is how he was when I met him. He had just retired. And on his left or the right of the picture is Sabal Zebin, his daughter, who came to study here at Andrews University and just got her PhD. When we go there, they know all about Adventists. When they came here, Connie Gain would take them to church, to PMC. She learned all about Christianity and Adventism. And I think she went fairly regularly to the Adventist church, so she knows a lot about Christians, and particularly Adventists. So when I would go there and visit, we have a meal, she will always ask, "Do you want to pray before the meal?" And they say, "You're a better Muslim than we are because you pray for everything," you know. So we have a good relationship. We took her on a trip with us just a few weeks ago in Saudi Arabia, as I said. So I'm very proud of that, and that's one of these hidden stories of Andrews University Archaeology. Here she was just a few weeks ago. We were in some Nabatean ruins in Saudi Arabia. They're very much like Petra, but they're even bigger and more fantastic. So here we are out in the Arabian desert, and she served as my translator. She's very proud. This is a famous monument. You can see she's pointing back at it. Second project that we've had is the project in Madaba. We've been living in Madaba for many years, and we decided we should do a history in Madaba. We were digging Jalul, but Madaba is such a famous biblical city that we decided to do a history of the Christian church there. And so we did this book, The Shrine of the Beheading of St. John the Baptist and the Origins of Madaba. That's a strange name, but that's what they call it. The church there, the Catholic Church, they call it the Shrine of the Beheading of John the Baptist. The place where they think he's beheaded, Machaerus, is not too far away from Madaba, so it made sense. And they used this connection with John the Baptist and his beheading to raise money from Europe to help build this church just before World War I. It turns out that a bunch of Karak Christians from the center of the country in Moabite land escaped the Muslim Christians. They came to Madaba. The government gave them this land, and they started building a new village, a Christian village on Madaba. So we were telling the whole history about the Christians there. Very interesting. I wish I had time, but it's in the book. The interesting thing about this, if you look at the bottom of this book, you can see the publisher. And this is kind of a funny story. I don't know how much I have on that. Yeah. It's published by the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem. Now, how this happens, kind of strange. On top of the picture in the background, we'll maybe back up, you see there's a Christian church there. It's on the Acropolis of the town of Madaba. It's very likely sitting on top of the ancient Moabite palace from biblical times, because that's where they would build the palace and the temple. And so the priest that was working there, his name was John. And I made a good relationship with him, and he was excited. He wanted to bring more tourists to his church. He said, if I can show there's archaeology under my church, maybe they'll come and see it. So he asked for my help. Well, I couldn't help him directly because you have to have special permits, but I gave him advice, and we wrote this book. He was very excited. And as we were doing the research, I said, you really need to get permission before you dig there. He says, well, we're a church. We don't need permission from the government, but we need permission from our superior. And I said, okay. I was thinking that was probably the local bishop, because he would be working under a diocese, bishop there. So I said, fine, when you get permission, let me know and I'll come and help you. So I come back from a few days later from my excavation at Jalul that you just heard about in Jordan, and I'm all dirty, I'm wearing blue jeans, and there was a student talking to me after the dig, and so we were talking about her assignments for the next day, and suddenly the priest comes running up to me, and he says, "Hey, my boss is here, can you come right now? We need to see him, we'll get permission to work on the church." And I said, "Well, sure, yeah, I'll be glad to come." I was thinking it was the bishop, I said, "Give me a few minutes, I'll finish with the student." He said, "He's very important, you need to come right now." And I said, "Well, I need to finish, and then I'll come right away." He says, "Well, I'm leaving a car for you, and they'll take you to where you're supposed to go." I said, "Okay." So I finished talking to the student, he took off, and when I got done, there was a man dressed in a beautiful suit, and he was waiting for me. It was a beautiful black car, kind of a limousine-like car. I thought, well, this is kind of over the top, so just to see a bishop. So anyway, he eagerly put me in the car, drove me to the far end of town of Madaba, where I'd never been before. We went to an area, a big estate, and there were, scores, hundreds of cars parked around. And I thought, what in the world's going on here? And I got out of the car. I'm walking through the cars. This guy's leading me to where there's a big group of people. Looks like they're dressed in their best clothes. They're all Arab Christians. Are wearing suits. The women are wearing beautiful dresses, all dolled up perfect, look like a wedding kind of a thing. And I thought, what are they inviting me to? And so they take me to the back of this. It was kind of an outdoor arena where they were meeting. And so I'm brought to the back. All the people are sitting there. And then this man announces, "Professor Younker is here to see the patriarch." Well, the Patriarch of Jerusalem is like second to the Pope in the Catholic Church. They were established in the early Christian church, 5 patriarchates, Jerusalem being one of them. They have tremendous power over many countries in the area. He was dressed like the Pope. I saw his flags on his limousine. I thought, what is this? He looks like a Pope. And well, he almost was. And so I was being introduced as Professor Younker. I'm wearing dirty clothes, blue jeans, my hair is messed up, everything like that, and here I'm being introduced, and this guy's in all of his robes. He's got a pontifical hat and everything. He has his assistants are all dressed up too. I'm taken to the front of the audience. Everybody's staring at me, and they sit me down right next to him, and I was not expecting this. And he said, "You're Professor Younker?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I understand you want to dig under one of my churches." And I said, "Well, yes, your Catholic church here in the town is sitting on top probably of some ancient Moabite ruins, and they could be very important for biblical history." And he said, "Okay, I will give you permission." He says, "Is there anything you need?" And I said, "Well, we can use old photographs and documents and things like that by the history of the church." He says, "We have all of that in Jerusalem. You have full access to all of our archives, all of our photographs, a lot of them from the 19th century, extremely helpful." And he said, "I'll tell you what, when you get finished with the research, we will pay for the publication of your book." And that's why as we wrote the book, it was translated into Arabic for the local Arab Christians, also into French, because a lot of the people there speak French and English. And so we had this book published by the Patriarchate of Jerusalem. And that's kind of a strange, but it was an exciting story. And here's a picture of him. He's not in that role anymore. This is some years ago, but it was quite an interesting experience. Other books, the lady standing next to me here is the sister of the current king of Jordan, Abdullah. This is his sister, and she's one of the patrons of archaeology. So we had a meeting, and she was nice enough to pose with me. Here's our team at Safra, an early Israelite site. They are there right now. You can see it overlooks the Dead Sea in the background. And they've had some very good discoveries. They're digging up this settlement of the earliest Israelites. They found some very important things, including an Egyptian statue. The Egyptians were still influential in the area, and they found some shrines and other things, little incense altars, actually fairly big ones. We brought one of them back with us and actually got permission from the Jordanian government. We had it for 5 years. We've restored it. I'll show you pictures of that in just a little bit. So here's the rooms and the benches of one of the sanctuaries there in the Safra area, and then here's some of their excavation. Oh, here's one of this is not the one I was just talking about, but this is an Egyptian statue that was carved. It was found in the ruins by the Andrews University team. This is the shrine. Dr. Stephanie Elkins, I think some of you know her. Her married name is Bates. She's an art professor at Andrews, and we got special permission. I was rather amazed. This is an Israelite shrine. It shows the mix of religions of Yahwehism and the pagan religion. You can see the god standing in the temple. It was painted, and she's slowly gluing it back together again. She did a fantastic job. And it was special for Andrews University to have permission to work on this precious artifact. It's now been shipped back after 5 years to the Jordan government. So very important artifact. Another major dig that we had, and I need to watch the time here. I probably should wind down pretty quick and let people ask questions. But in 1990, we had a very important dig at Tel Gezer in Israel. Andrews University worked with the University of Arizona and Bill Deaver. There was a big debate about this gateway and the accompanying palace, whether this was made by Solomon or not. The Bible says Solomon rebuilt Gezer, and we thought this was it, but critics were challenging us about this. So we went back, had an excavation of Andrews students and Arizona students in 1990. You can see Bill Deaver in the khaki in the bottom of the picture, and a younger me in the dark brown shirt sitting next to him. Here we are. I was quite excited. This is my first big dig working with a very famous archaeologist. And we started doing excavations, looking for Joshua's wall, because Joshua conquered Gezer, and looking for the palace of Solomon. So two major goals we had for this excavation. You can see my hairstyle is still the same as Trump, so this is part of my lawsuit here, so it hasn't changed in all these years. They had a super glue back then, and if you sprayed your hair, it would never change the rest of your life, so that's how that works. So this is after we cleared the weeds. This is the area of the wall and the gate complex system there. This is Joshua's wall from over 100 years ago when it was first dug. We had to go back, find the wall again, and get accurate dates on it. This is a paper, and we were successful in that, by the way. We were able to date that to the time of King Solomon. I don't remember if I have all the pictures about that here, but we got an article that came out. They were interviewing, this is Christianity Today in the 1995, and they asked Bill Deaver why he singled out Andrews University as one of the few good examples of doing biblical archaeology. And he says, the major American project in Jordan is the Maudaba Plains Project, which has been running for nearly 25 years under the direction of a consortium of Seventh-day Adventist schools. And he goes on to say, everybody who wants to do biblical archaeology should take a lesson from the Adventists because they're doing it right. These are some of the articles that came out about our work in various scholarly publications about our work at Gezer. We did find the walls of Joshua's time from the conquest. We found the ruins of Solomon mentioned in 1 Kings 6:9. And we even found the earthquake mentioned in the Bible of Amos that struck Gezer. I found that actually. Bill Deaver was very skeptical, and he said, I don't think you found that. But when I showed him all the evidence, he finally agreed. And he wrote an article about a case study in biblical archaeology, how archaeology was proving the biblical story about the Amos earthquake. I was mentioned in a footnote. That's the way it works in scholarship. We most recently have been over in Sicily, where that red A is. On the left side, this is where we are working at San Michele, the earliest Christian church found in Sicily so far. This is part of our team. Sicily, of course, is right across from North Africa, and we have the situation where a lot of migrants there, Christians and Muslims, are being persecuted by a lot of the tribes in Africa. So there's been a mass exodus. I'm sure you've heard about it. People escaping. Some of them have horrendous stories. I talked to some of these young men. Their whole family were killed by, people there, other tribes that were trying to eliminate them. So they all have amazing stories of survival coming across the Mediterranean Sea, landing on Sicily. So we've been hiring them to work for our project. They love the work, and we give them a certificate from Andrews University, and they can take that certificate, give it to the Italian judge, and he will give them citizenship based on that, because they prove that they're useful citizens that are willing to engage in work and in scientific research with an American university. So we've had a lot of success. We have some more coming to join us in a couple of weeks. San Michele, this is the excavation. You can see the mosaic floor there. We're digging this out again right now, verifying dates and finding a lot of new things. There's a tomb of a priest in the middle of the church called the tomb of Dionysius. Tomb 54 on the right is the tomb of a lady who had lots of gold on her, and it turns out she was the patriarchess of the church, paid for it. She had a villa there before. They tore that down and then built the first Christian church there. And there's actually 3 floors and 2 phases of the church. And here's the reconstruction of our church. This just got published, and we got a great review. We've published the book. It's a big, thick book, 500 pages in Italian, another book in English. I insist everything's in Italian and English. And we got a 6-page wonderful review by some of the top archaeologists in Italy. So we're very proud of that as well. This is sort of some top plans of our work there. And this is some of the gold that came from the lady in Tomb 54. At the bottom is a medallion of the emperor who was standing for Trinitarianism. She wore that proudly around her neck. We don't know her name because somebody came along after her and they tore out the mosaic with her name on it. The priest's name was left, but somebody didn't like women. They didn't want them, later people to know a woman was actually paying for everything, so they tore her name out apparently. But her body, her skeleton, still had all the gold jewelry. This is on display now in the museum in Palermo. I just put this picture in of a typical lady from that time, the lady of Tomb 54. Maybe someday we'll learn what her name is. One of my students was on the project, an Adventist lady. She may come and work here next year. Karina Prestes, Dr. Prestes now. She published an award-winning book called Excavating Women, the Archaeology of Leaders in Early Christianity. Very interesting book. She did some great research. This is Karina, and she'll be joining our Andrews team shortly. These are some of the other publications. We did a whole history of the town of Salemi like we did for Madaba. We got a whole journal called CCLI Archaeologica in Italian, which highlights our work, and then these are some of our publications. This is the latest one. The foreword, I'm proud to say, was by Roger Wilson, who's the top Sicilian, he's a British guy, but he's the top archaeologist in Sicily for the English-speaking world. So we've been getting some great feedback from our Adventist research there, and we're proud of that. We have a museum exhibit with a catalog in the local museum showing our stuff, and we even got invited, as I said, to come to the Vatican to share our results there. And then the final thing, maybe I'll close with this. We, about 7 years ago, were invited to come look at Mount Ararat. This is a nice satellite picture. The big peak is the one, this is looking north towards Georgia and the Black Sea. The peak, higher peak there with the snow on it's Arida, the one that we've been climbing. This is our research team for Ararat. A mix of Adventists and non-Adventists, Turkish scholars, French scholars, Ukrainian scholars. Even my son is standing next to me. I have to have younger people. I'm finding it's more difficult to climb up on top of Mount Ararat, so now we have what we call the high climbers. The young guys climb to the top. I go halfway up and wait to hear what they found. That's how you do it. And here we are at a different time of year, climbing the mountain. This is just last seasons. We've had about 7 seasons exploring the mountain. It's huge. We're using drone satellite imagery and all sorts of things. And I'm showing off this picture because the guy in the red scarf right there, the one on the right, is Michael Younker, Dr. Michael Younker. I have to brag about him a little bit because he helped me with my research. And that's, I didn't get to the top of Mount Ararat. I fell about 1,000 feet short, but Younker made it to the top. So I show this picture off and kind of brag about that. So he works quite a bit with me on this research. We also have climbed Mount Judy. That's the Muslim Mount Ararat. And here's our whole team up there. We had to go with a bunch of guards because the Kurds in the area, there's been a lot of terrorism, but we got special permission, and they took us there and kept us safe while we were doing our research on the border of Turkey and Syria. So again, I could give you whole stories on each of these things, what we're doing and finding. These are some of the books we've published. I just gave one of these to one of the guys here in the audience. If somebody really needs one and wants one, you can get them at the Institute of Archaeology. This is Mount Ararat, Noah's Ark Researches by Professor Octave Belli. I should back up. Let's see where Professor Belli is. He's the guy on the blue coat, clear over on the right with the sunglasses. He's one of the top archaeologists of Turkey. One of the things we've been blessed with, like the Patriarch in Madaba, Bill Deaver at Gezer, Professor Belli, God has put us in touch with some of the top scholars, and it's really helped our research advance. That's another blessing of our work there. Back to Michael there, and here we are in Judy. Here's our guard and some of our books. And here's one of the conferences we had at our university with the dean of the seminary, Yiji Muscala, is in the front row there. Professor Belli's black suit and left. We had the top general of the area participating there too. We work with the military, of course, for a variety of reasons, but they give us permission and keep us safe while we're working over there. Some of the things we're studying in our Noah's Ark research. This is one of the tombs at the bottom of Mount Judy, the tomb of Noah there. I don't know if I have a picture. It's very big because Noah was a big man before the flood. Okay, so he's at least 20 feet tall or something like that. But of course, this is a cenotaph. There's no body inside. But we are trying to get research. We understand there is a body underneath of a man. We're trying to get information. We don't think it's Noah, but somebody thought it was, and so they built this memorial on top. And a lot of people for centuries have gone there to worship Noah. This is Shernock University at the foot of Judy Mountain, the second Ark Mountain. And the man that says surf beach waves in the black t-shirt next to me, I'm in a light green shirt, that's Professor Ibrahim Boz. He's one of the top professors at Shernock University, and he's also assisting us in our Noah's Ark research. I'm giving you just sort of an impression of the people we're meeting, the kinds of things we're doing, and we've been having wonderful success with that. And then most recently, we went, of course, to Saudi Arabia. We landed at Riyadh, and then went up a few. I don't have a pointer. I don't know if it will work. Maybe it will. Yeah, we landed at Riyadh, where there's a military bases. We flew up here to Ha'il. Then we drove all the way over to this area to see Nabonidus city. But we were looking at a mountain in the middle near Ha'il that some people say it's called Aja Mountain. It may be Noah's Ark Mountain, according to the Prophet Muhammad. So we spent some days exploring this mountain and going to the areas. I won't go through the whole story here. This is a quote that says, describes Mount Judy before the time of Muhammad, actually. And here we are studying petroglyphs. This is part of our research team. And some of the stuff that we've been studying. We're looking at the petroglyphs that show a lot of the animals. This area is very rich in animal life, and I wonder if the Noah's Ark story got connected to the abundance of wild animals that live in this mountain. It's an oasis in the middle of the desert, and there's lots of trees, vegetation, water, and all sorts of animals, including the leopards, lions, and other things. They live in the Aja Mountains, which is number one candidate for Muhammad, where Noah's Ark landed. I don't think it landed there, but we're still researching it and trying to understand why Muhammad picked that mountain and how it got into the tradition. So it gives you an idea. This is part of our team. Sabal, my student, as Doug Zinke on the far left, and my Jordanian PhD. Sabal is right next to her there. So, and these are some of the ruins. I won't go through all of these. They all have their story. But we're in the middle of the Saudi Arabian desert, and look at the water, the greenery, and everything. Most people don't know this place exists. There's lots of archaeology there, lots of petroglyphs, and it's very abundant in water, wildlife, and so forth. So, and then I'll close with this, perhaps. The future of biblical archaeology. A few years ago, I was asked to write an article on Adventists in archaeology. This was in a book called The Future of Biblical Archaeology, published in 2004. A number of Adventists were invited to speak and to make contributions, and I talked about the Andrews Way in this book, and it got picked up by other people, including National Geographic. Eric Klein wrote a book called From Eden to Exile, and he talks about bad archaeology. But then he says the Adventists are an exception. What could be called the Andrews Way can easily be called the MPP Way, and he gave a lot of praise to Seventh-day Adventists for their careful scholarly work. So here's what I'll close with, the Andrews Way. I published this, and it got picked up by several people, including Eric Klein and National Geographic. Andrews Adventist scholars should be forthright with their findings. Do not minimize problems or stretch interpretations of data to explain things away. Do not make claims beyond what the data can support. Be quick and complete in publishing your results. Engage and work with mainstream scholarship. Don't just hide off in the corner because you have to be tested. And include a diversity of people and specialists. We've tried to do that. Obviously, we have international teams. We have a geologist who helps us study the rocks of Mount Ararat, for example. And take the history of the Bible seriously, but do not place upon archaeology the burden of proving the Bible. The Bible is true anyway. So archaeology is not needed to prove the Bible, but it sure is nice when it corresponds with the Bible, and we find lots of evidence for that. So this has become, this was picked up by National Geographic. When I wrote this, National Geographic called me, and they said, we would like you to be the advisor, the consultant. We'll pay you for a book on biblical archaeology called The Letter and the Scroll. So they hired me as a believer. They hired Eric Klein, the guy that wrote the other book, as a non-believer. We fought with each other to see what would go on a book on biblical archaeology, and it came out to be a very good book. We had a lot of fun with that. So what have Adventists found that helps our understanding of the Bible? We have insights into the kingdom of Sion and the conquest. We've discovered much about the biblical Ammonites. We've discovered Baalis, an Ammonite king mentioned in the Bible but never known before outside of the Bible. We've discovered the pools of Heshbon, King Solomon. We've discovered evidence of Joshua, Solomon's activities at Gezer. We have early Israelite settlements in Jordan. We have discovered evidence for Abraham's camels. There's a big skepticism whether he had camels or not, but we actually found petroglyph material that shows that they do go back to Abraham's time. We have material on the Noah's Ark traditions and the Ark tombs, earliest wine, etc., the earliest wine production in the world near Ararat, and we found a lot of evidence for women in early Christianity. These are not all of them, but these are some of the highlights that we've been publishing, working on over the last few years. So with that, that's kind of my presentation to give you an idea of what we've been up to for the last few years. If you need to leave, you can, but I'll have a few minutes if people would like to ask questions about what they just saw, about any of our research. This would be a chance to do that, I guess. Maybe these are what this is for, I don't know. Yeah, if you don't mind. I don't know if you have questions, maybe we've answered everything, but I wanted to give you an idea of what Adventists are doing in biblical archaeology. I don't know if they'll turn that on. So, this is a guy digging at Tel Jalul there in the early morning. We get up before the sun rises because we have to take pictures when the light's even. We do that every single day. So I'm used to being up about 5 o'clock every day. So it's nice to come home and sleep in till 6.
My question is relating to your message earlier this morning.
Yeah.
You pointed out about the dream within a dream of Nabonidus.
Yeah.
3.5 years before Daniel's dream within a dream. The critics are going to say that Daniel is a copy of Nabonidus.
I'm anticipating that, yeah. They haven't said it yet because they haven't seen my report.
What's your answer?
There's a number of things that I didn't give in the presentation that will date this kind of, we have no examples for this dream in later times. So that doesn't mean someone couldn't have come up with one, but that would be pretty amazing that this obscure and little, only one time in all of history, known, the framework for the dream would be followed by a guy 400 years later. How would he even know about this? The inscription itself was buried in the ground until the 19th century. So the idea that somebody in the 2nd century would know about this dream and follow the same style to me would be statistically amazing. But there's also some technical things, such as the wording on the sanctuary that's found in both the Hebrew Bible and in the Akkadian sources. It seems like there would be someone who is contemporary with that language usage that would know about it. And again, this has not been pointed out in scholarship yet. You know, the words for restoring the sanctuary, nobody's done a comparative analysis of the vocabulary or anything else like that. We already have good studies on Daniel in terms of the Aramaic, musical instruments and so forth, and we've already made the case that the words used in Daniel are archaic Aramaic that was commonly used in the 6th century, not later on. Some scholars are ignoring that, but when you start putting all these things together, including the dream within a dream formula, which is unique to the 6th century with no examples later on, you start having to ask yourself, maybe we are a little bit hasty in dating Daniel late. Already in scholarship, I have some works in my library where scholars are starting to acknowledge that the stories that are not visions may have actually occurred in the 6th century. They're already conceding that. You know, the Belshazzar story, the person writing about Belshazzar knew too much about him. The Greeks in the 2nd century and even earlier, particularly the 2nd century, they did not know about Belshazzar, for example. And yet the writer of Daniel seemed to know a lot about him, gives a lot of detail. And that's now being corroborated by archaeological evidence that was not available, as far as we know, to the Greek philosophers and writers who were telling the history of them. So we have a number of things. To me, it's kind of a compilation, more and more data coming together. There's some technical things that would take too long to go through, but I see some elements in the Daniel story in comparison, and I didn't go through that this morning, with the Nabonidus story that strike me as the person had to be intimately acquainted with the Nabonidus stela. And as I said, that stela was only rediscovered. What happened to that stela, I can give you a little bit of the history. I didn't do it this morning, didn't have time. Nabonidus was not a popular king. He wrote this stela in 556. By 539, his son was dead. Babylon was conquered, the Marduk people took over, and they took his stela down, and they got rid of it. And they buried it over, we know there's a neighborhood near Hela where they actually buried the thing, and we found it a long time later. So the Greeks would not, unless it was by hearsay, they would not have known that, and I doubt they would have known the significance of it even if they'd heard about the dream. They probably wouldn't have been able to see its structure. They would have just heard the story, oh, he had this dream, and he had to build the sanctuary. They would not have seen the intimate way it was put together as a dream within a dream. That was only discovered in this past century, actually. So these things make me very suspicious that that argument would fly very far. But we'll see. I'm going to write this all up. It'll be more technical than I was able to show, and we'll see how scholarship reacts to it. Yeah.
I went to your documentary last fall at Andrews, and you said the Ark has not been found. The Ark.
Yeah.
But now I'm hearing rumors that it has been found.
Yeah. What happened? Well, of course, people have been claiming the Ark's been found for the last, 75, all the way back to World War I. So there's lots of stories, and they're published in different places. We've been systematically going through those. The story that's getting the most, there's two stories getting the most attention. One is Ahmed Parachute, a Kurdish guy who makes a lot of money taking people up Mount Ararat. We went up with him too. And he shows people a lot of wood debris up on the Red Canyon on the south side of the mountain, and he just kind of hints this could come from Noah's Ark. We didn't know what to think of that, but once we started studying the wood, we got samples, did C14 dates. We started studying the woodworking techniques, and they're identical. They're very unique, the way the wood is cut, the way it's fitted together in buildings, the way the windows and doors and all that are created. And we found in the photographs of the wood we saw on Mount Ararat, all the woodworking techniques were replicated identically in houses in the Black Sea about 3 or 4 hours to the north of Ararat. And we've done a very thorough, systematic study, and we have been able to show that all the wood on Ararat came from the Black Sea area. That's the bottom line. So that's one of the stories. We're disappointed. We would have loved that to be wood from the Ark, but it's not, and we have to be honest and say what it is. We haven't revealed that publicly. I'm telling you, but we haven't published it yet. Our Turkish colleagues, the top scholars like Professor Belli and some others I'm working with, they know what we found. They agree with us. But they want us to publish it right away, but we're getting all the data together and getting it just right before we publish it. So that's number one. But what I have been associated with accidentally is the Derupener site. It's pronounced different ways by a Russian aviator who's associated with the discovery of this boat-shaped thing, first reported in Life magazine half a century ago. From the air, it kind of looks like a boat because it's boat-shaped. But I've been to the site many times. It didn't look like a man-made thing at all when I saw it in person. It's not as nice as you see in the photographs. It's warped, deformed. And in the area where the sides of the boat would be, the wood, I saw big boulders in the side of the Ark, and that would be impossible for them to be planted there if it was wood. Actually, it's a sediment that's come down, and it's given a false illusion. We call them pseudomorphs that look like wood, but they're not really wood. We had a team that I'm working with. I wasn't involved with the research. I don't think I'll mention their names publicly here. I don't think they'd care, but I won't. I'll just mention their first names, Goncha and Bülent. Husband-wife archaeological team. One teaches at University of Istanbul. The other teaches at Istanbul Technical University. The person working at the Technical University went to the Derupener site. They did all sorts of studies there. They took samples. They did their own scanning down below to see what was down below, replicating what the guys claiming they found the Ark found with chambers, stuff like that. They said none of it's true. And I talked to Goncha at length. He said, we found a few archaeological stuff, but they date to the wrong period, have nothing to do with Noah or Noah's Ark. And so I said, well, why don't you publish this? I'm working with them. I brought them to the United States. I've done survey. I've visited their sites. I said, you need to publish this. And he said, well, the funny thing is we were asked by the Culture Ministry, who gives authorization for Turkish permits for doing this kind of work, archaeological work, and they asked us to do the study on the site. So we did. We had geologists, archaeologists, technicians. We did the research. We concluded it's absolutely nothing but a geological formation. So we told the Culture Ministry that, and they didn't want us to publish it. They said that tourism is too important for the Kurds in the area. If you put this out that it's a big, nothing, then that will ruin the tourism. So they suppressed it. He told me that, I heard it with my own ears. I've talked to him several times. I'm trying to find a way to encourage him to go around the cultural ministry and get it published. Now, I don't want him to get in trouble, but he is open to trying to get this information out. So that, with my own observations and this recent research that's been not published, but very thorough. I talked to the geologists too. They came to one of our ARI conferences, and I talked to them in person, and they said there's no ark there. So they confirmed what my observations were. So, but my name, because I was at the conference and I was the keynote speaker, a couple of people, without asking permission, I know who they are. It was a high official in the ARI University. He reported the conference to the press, and he said, Dr. Younker is here to help us find the ark at the Drupal site. That's not true. And then another guy, I won't mention his name, but he also said, Dr. Younker and Andrews University is helping us confirm that this is Noah's Ark. That's not true either. Since that got into the news, I've been contacted by a television station in Brazil, New York Post, in America, and other people calling me, can we have an interview with you about your discovery of Noah's Ark? And I said, I'm sorry, that's not true. I did not find Noah's Ark. I don't think Noah's Ark's been found. This is a bogus story. So we're kind of in that mode right now, which is why we keep kind of a low profile while we're doing the research. Do I believe in Noah's Ark? Yes. Have we found Mount Ararat? Maybe the one that everybody looks at might be the right one. I've written articles defending it, but we're doing a geological study to see if the volcano arose after the flood or during the flood. If it arose during the flood, it could be Noah's Mountain. If it rose after the flood, the ark would have landed before it existed. So that's a problem. But we have other candidates we're exploring in the area. This is a delicate thing, but that gives you a general understanding. But Andrews University and my name were drug into this accidentally, and it's not true. We're not confirming that that's the ark. Yeah, Pastor Daniel. Maybe there's someone else back there.
If I understood correctly, one of the examples you had this morning of some writing you mentioned went back almost as far as Moses.
Yeah.
Was there a written language before that?
Yeah.
Okay, that was just one of the oldest examples you've had.
A lot of critics, well, we have writing going all the way back to the period of Sumer, in southern Iraq, not Samaria, but Sumer, and they were using pictograms and so on, and then they eventually evolved into a more modern kind of a language. But that's our early written material, and it goes back conventional dating to about 3000, a little earlier than 3000 BC. And so writing was around well before Moses, whom we date traditionally to about 1445, 1450 for the date of the Exodus. That's our conservative view from Siegfried Horn and Bill Shea. So certainly writing was around. The question then is, would Moses have known how to write? And there are evidences now that the Proto-Hebrew alphabet did exist as early as the late Bronze Age. We're finding archaeological evidence for that. Now there's a lot of argument, contention, fighting about that among scholars, but I think slowly we're winning the argument that there was an alphabetic writing system available to Moses when the Torah, when the first 5 books of the Bible would have been written. So, but regardless of whether we can prove Moses wrote or not, there was writing around, and there were many different systems of writing. Yeah.
There's been a couple of books recently that have suggested that Judaism only goes back a couple of centuries before Christ, but Yahwehism goes back way further. Can you tell us the difference between the two and whether that actual non-evidence of Judaism is actually correct? And maybe about, say, King Josiah and his discovery of the scrolls.
The last part, whose discovery of the scrolls? I didn't quite hear.
King Josiah.
Oh, Josiah, yeah. Well, he's much later, of course. He would be, near the time of Christ, just after that. Here's the history of Jews, if you will. The earliest people group that we would later identify with the Jews are called in the Bible itself Hebrews. Okay, they're people that came over the Euphrates River. It's from the word Eber, which means crossing over. So at least that's the common understanding of the etymology of the history of that particular word. They're called Hebrews all the way down till you get to Egypt. Then you start talking about Jacob and Israel and the children of Israel. At that time, which would be, we can debate that, but somewhere around the 15th century in our conservative chronology, and a little bit earlier, during the sojourn, the children of Israel are being called Israelites. And they're called that through their captivity and during the escape from Egypt and the movement into the conquest of the Promised Land. They're always called Israelites, Israelites, Israelites. And once they established themselves in the Promised Land, you have the kingdom of Israel. They're still a unified people under Saul and then David and Solomon. After Solomon and his death, the kingdom splits in two, and the southern kingdom, we start calling them Judahites. That's the southern kingdom under Rehoboam, and the people that stay with Jeroboam. That's a whole interesting story in itself. We don't talk about it much, but it's quite interesting, the history of Jeroboam. He starts a separate kingdom that is later called Israel. So they kind of maintain the traditional name, even though they're not following the line of David anymore. Rehoboam in the south is following David. But we conventionally scholars call the southern kingdom the Judahites, and then the northern kingdom Israel. Now, Israel will disappear during the 8th century, late 8th century, when the Assyrians come and they capture Samaria and they haul most of the northern tribes away, the Israelites. So and they talk about the lost tribes of Israel. They're hauled off into captivity and kind of disappear. They don't completely. Some of the people who stay behind will become called the Samaritans, okay, because they live around Samaria. But they were considered sort of half-breeds, Israelites that married, non-Israelites, and so they're not pure. So they got kind of a bad name, certainly by the time of Jesus. They were looking down their nose at the half-breeds, the Samaritans. But the Israelites disappear, so to speak. But the Judahites continue to survive all the way down to the time of Nebuchadnezzar. It's from the Judahites we eventually get the name Jews. But that will happen after the Babylonian period, after Nabonidus, when we start getting into the Persian and particularly the Hellenistic period. Then you start talking about Jews, and that's where that name starts being used a lot. That goes from about 200-300 years before Jesus into the time of Jesus, and after all the way to the present, refer to the Jewish people as Jews. But that was an evolution from Hebrew to Israelite to Judahite to Jew, and it goes through time. Does that make sense? So you got to kind of place your understanding of Jews into the right historical framework and then go from there on whatever other theory you're wanting to explore. Yeah?
When we study Joshua's conquest, we encounter one big issue when we compare archaeological findings of Jericho with the biblical account. We find this story. Correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that Garstang unearthed Jericho, analyzed, and then said, oh, yay, hooray, this is biblical Jericho. Then Kenyon appeared, I believe, and said, no way. She reevaluated all findings and said, no, it was 1,000 years before that date. Then I believe Wood tried reevaluating Kenyon and said, no, Garstang was right, but I believe he didn't convince the academia. And the question is, when you study academic books, many scholars still are convinced that Jericho, the walls didn't exist at that time. Do you have any solution to that?
It's still an ongoing challenge, but I am sympathetic to Bryant Woods. Bryant Woods, evangelical archaeologist, and he did a study. Kathleen, the whole story of Jericho, initially a guy named Garstang did excavations there, and he said, oh, I found pottery and walls from the time of Joshua, and he advertised that, and people were excited. Then in the 1950s, a British scholar who was a bit of a skeptic, Kathleen Kenyon, re-excavated Jericho, and she was the one that said this material was misdated, and it dates 1,000 years off. It was called City 4, and she said City 4 does not match up with the biblical chronology for the Exodus conquest story of the fall of Jericho. But Bryant Woods, a later scholar, came along and looked at Kathleen Kenyon's work and her analysis of the pottery. Kenyon was basing it on the absence of certain types of pottery. She said, since this pottery, which would date to the time of Exodus, is not found at Jericho, Jericho must be earlier. Bryant Woods found a bunch of pottery in Kenyon's own collection that dated from the time of the Exodus, and she didn't recognize it, didn't understand it, or omitted it. We're not sure what happened. So he wrote a whole dissertation saying there is pottery from the time of Joshua, late Bronze Age, 1400, at Jericho, and he gave pictures and so forth, and said that Kenyon was wrong. Now, people are trying to challenge him. My own professor, Deaver, said Bryant Wood doesn't know pottery, he's dating it wrong, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I would never approve of his work. Here's the irony about that. It shows you how scholars let their own biases get in the way. I went to Bryant Woods, and I said, Professor Deaver, my professor, but he's a very famous professor, very good in ceramics. He said you don't know what you're talking about when it comes to dating ceramics, and that you don't have stuff from the late Bronze Age. And so he smiled at me, Bryant Woods. I said, Bill Deaver would never approve your work, your research. And he said, would you like to see my dissertation? I said, sure. He showed me the signature page on his dissertation. The professor that signed off said he did good work was Bill Deaver. Bill Deaver had forgotten that he approved the work, but once he discovered this student disagreed with him, then he disavowed it. But when he first looked at it, he was being objective. He had no biases, and he said, this guy does good work. So that leads you to the problem. There is a certain amount of subjectivity in scholars' analysis and work, and they're often influenced by their own presuppositions. If you don't believe that a person can be inspired by God to predict the future through a vision, then Daniel can never be a 6th century person. It's just impossible. There's no human way of explaining how any human being on their own can see the future. If you believe in God and believe that God can inspire a prophet and can show them through a vision the future, then you have a different worldview. So a lot of times these come down to debates about our own worldview. One of the things I think needs to be done, and maybe before God passes me on, if he hasn't come before, I'd like to see a stronger philosophical work on the shortcomings of conventional scientific work. Most of them are anti-supernatural. It's understandable. I was trained that way. And their presupposition is based on Einstein, Aristotelian, Aristotle view of the universe, which basically says God or anything outside of our natural cannot interfere, cannot penetrate, cannot do any of these miracles. If you take that view, then naturally none of the divine events in the Bible can be true. Jesus rising from the dead, 3 days, totally impossible. I worked in a mortuary. None of those dead guys I worked with ever came back to life again, and I'm kind of glad they didn't. Would have scared the whoopee out of me, I suppose. But the fact is that a naturalist who's based on Einsteinian, Aristotelian science will never be able to accept it. I think we need to approach that argument more carefully because there are weaknesses in the empiricist view of the universe. And my professor, almost everybody I worked with, come from that perspective. They a priori reject God in the universe and that God can interfere. So I think that's where the argument needs to be. If you start looking at the artifacts, well, this is late bronze, no, it's not. There's a certain amount of subjectivity. At the end of the day, I think Bryant Woods wins that argument, and we can probably demonstrate that statistically by an analysis of the pottery. But if you're already biased against that conclusion, you'll do everything you can in your mind to say there's something wrong there. Okay, so and that's part of real scholarship, not just in archaeology, but really in all sciences. Creation science, flood geology, all of that, geology, all of that's based on your presuppositions. That's the big challenge for Adventist scholarship, to be honest, in these arenas.
Yeah. Left.
I'd like to go back to Noah's Ark and the search for it. The world has just had a flood happen that's flooded the whole world. Mm-hmm. It's killed the dinosaurs, ocean life, land life. The Grand Canyon was made. All these things were made. The water recedes. Noah comes out of the ark, and he has to start over. Well, I put to you that the first ark became the first Home Depot. What do?
Yeah.
You disassemble the material you have to build your new society out of. So on that basis, how can the ark ever be found?
Well, that's actually a good point. Now, what you're saying, I don't disagree with you, and this is something our team has discussed. What would Noah use for building materials when he first got off the ark? There's even stories that suggest that he disassembled part of it. But that doesn't come from him or doesn't come from the Bible. The big problem is the Bible doesn't say when Noah got off the thing, he did the sacrifice and he disassembled the ark and built a house. It doesn't say that. So even though what you say is perfectly logical and reasonable, we don't have any proof for it. He may have disassembled the ark, he may not have. Maybe the wood was too hard. It was like stone, some people say, and it was too hard for him to do. Maybe it was too high up in the mountain and they didn't want to carry it down. They make these kinds of stories. I don't know. And it may be, you're absolutely right. I've said this in meetings, some of this, it may be that Noah's Ark doesn't exist anymore. It was disassembled, we'll never find it. Other people point to the fact that if you have an area that's geologically so unstable, earthquakes, subsequent volcanic activity, et cetera, could have destroyed the remnants of the ark. And that's being seriously discussed too, so there's nothing for us to find. And I'm very open to those possibilities, either from your idea or these other ideas that it was subsequently destroyed. Professor Belly sometimes wondered if it wasn't blown up in a subsequent eruption of Mount Ararat. But we don't know any of these. I don't like to think of myself as an ark hunter. What I'm doing is studying the traditions of the ark that all these people have out there, their ideas, and we run those down to see what's there. And but obviously, if you have 5 tombs of Noah, they can't all be true, right? If you have 5 Mount Ararats, they can't all be true. But we are trying to systematically study these things, see how the stories like the one in Muhammad in the middle of Saudi Arabia, we have a pretty good idea of why he picked that mountain. I didn't give all the reasons here, but we'll slowly publish this and let the scholarly community see what they want to do with that. But your idea is perfectly viable, yeah.
A number of years ago, you were at the Lake Union Conference making a presentation. And if I recall right, which is a big question, is that you were talking about David not being written in stone.
Oh, yeah. There's a monument called the Tel Dan inscription, yeah.
And it seems to me that you were with your group, they were walking on a path, and they kicked a piece of pottery or something, and on the back side of it, there was proof of David. Is that my recollection correct?
That wouldn't come from me. I'm not aware of anybody kicking anything over and finding David's name. There are 3 places where we think we see David's name, but it's not on the back of a potsherd. One is the Tel Dan inscription, found by Avraham Beiron at the side of Dan. It was, there was a stele. The Syrians came into northern Israel, and they conquered it temporarily, and they put up a victory stele in the, near the gate of Dan, near the city of Dan. It used to be called Laish in older Abraham times. But they found this stele. It was reused in a wall of the later Israelites. So the Israelites obviously didn't want to keep the victory stele bragging about their defeat, so they chopped it up and put it into a wall. They pulled it out of the wall, they translated it, and it says, talks about a victory over the house, the Beit in Hebrew, house of David, Beit David in Hebrew. And so, where was I going to go with that one? Some of the scholars were saying that can't be David. They were trying to retranslate David into Dude or Dode, you know, house of the uncle, house of the kettle, but none of those really gained acceptance. So most scholars believe this is referring to the house of David, the dynastic house. David is not alive anymore, but his descendants would be called, you know, sons of David living in the house of David. The throne would be called the house of David. So that's authentic. Now for a follow-up, there was in Karnak, a scholar claims that David might appear there, partly butchered in some of the hieroglyphs there from the time of Rehoboam about, as I recall, or Shishak. I got to review that one because I'm a little tired right now. There's another one, I'm trying to think here, the David, okay, and the Mesha inscription, which is stone. We have a copy of it in the Horn Museum, and it was written by King Mesha in the 8th century, that would be the 700s, and he also makes reference to something like the house of David. He mentions the name David. It's not very clear to read, but Lemaire, a famous French scholar, epigrapher, and he says that David's name appears there too. So we have one in Egypt, we have one in Moab, and then we have the one at Tel Dan. Those are the only 3 occurrences I know of David so far, okay? And that's a pretty big thing, so if something else came out, I think we'd all hear about it. So we have 3 occurrences of David, all of them after David's death, of course, but nevertheless, they prove the historic existence of a King David. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the Ark of the Covenant? Do we have any, that's kind of, we hear stuff, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there's always, you know, these are incredible, like we've got Indiana Jones, you know, Raiders of the Lost Ark, that kind of help get the public excited. And there are people like Ron Wyatt himself, sort of an Adventist adventurer who claimed he found everything that was important, Noah's Ark, the Ark of the Covenant, and a lot of other things. We've been to almost all of those sites, and the chariots in the Red Sea, we've had our own divers there. We didn't find any chariots, but we did find some wheels from grocery carts, Toyota cars and bicycles and other things, but no chariots. So I believe in the existence of the Ark of the Covenant, but I don't think it has been found. I could go into all of the, you know, the claims and where they are located, but as we've tried to track the stories down, none of them have borne out reality. We haven't been able to prove any of them. So some people think the Ark was hidden in Jordan, not too far from where I dig, And the Jordanians get very mad about that because they're afraid the Israelis will want to invade Jordan if the ark was found there, you know. They're very worried about that. Other people say that the ark was hidden around Jerusalem. Ron Wyatt actually thought it was hidden just north of the city there in a cave in the Garden of Gethsemane, the Protestant Garden of Gethsemane. There's more than one Garden of Gethsemane. And there's a place where they say Jesus was buried. He wasn't buried there, unfortunately, because that tomb existed. Jesus was buried in a new tomb, and the tomb in the garden tomb was 700 years earlier. It was not a new tomb, so it wouldn't fit for the biblical story of Jesus. Why am I saying that? Because Ron Wyatt said the Ark of the Covenant was hidden where Jesus was crucified. I guess that's why I drifted off into that. But we find no evidence of the Ark of the Covenant near the garden tomb area. Other places around Jerusalem, we have not been able to track down any evidence, and we haven't found any evidence in Jordan. There's a couple of locations there. So there's lots of stories, but we haven't been able to verify any of them so far. I think it existed. Ellen White seems to indicate it's still hidden, so maybe it will come up in the future. I remember having an amusing story of a lady, I think she was an Adventist, who told me she had a vision. It was actually conveyed to me by an intermediary. She wanted me to help her get the ark out of Jerusalem. So I said, well, what's going on? Why do you think the ark's there? She said, I was given a vision, and I know the place where it is. It was, near the old city, just north of the old city of Jerusalem. And I said, what do you want me to do? She said, well, I want you to help us extract it. And I said, well, what are you going to do with it? She said, we'll put it in a car, and we're going to get out of the country. And I said, well, how are you going to get out of the country? Well, there's a little airport north of Jerusalem in the Palestinian area, Ramallah, and there is an airport there. And she said, we're going to take the ark up there, we're going to put it on this plane and fly it out of the country. Well, that's not easy to do in that part of the world. Any plane that's not properly authorized will be shot down, first of all, and they're not going to let any plane take off that's not inspected. So the idea of, ferreting the ark out of the country secretly in a small plane is basically impossible. The second thing is, I said, have you ever thought of what you're asking me to do is to steal the ark, which says, thou shalt not steal. And I said, I can just see the headlines, Andrews University professor arrested for stealing the ark. That's great publicity. But we ended up not being able to support her in her adventure there. I think it kind of died there. So you get a lot of people out there with interesting ideas. I believe in the Ark of the Covenant. There's no doubt about that. I don't think it's been found yet. Anybody else? These are all kind of fun, exciting things. It's kind of, I feel bad to always have to say, no, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it. But there's a ton of great biblical archaeology discoveries that do verify the people of the Bible, all the people of the Old Testament, all the kings, all the events. We've got wonderful dramatic confirmation for the basic core of the Old Testament story, and I'm very excited and happy about it. Another time we should go through those things. But everybody wants to know about Noah's Ark, the Ark of the Covenant, those kinds of things. That's natural. I would love to discover one of those things. Yeah.
I just want to shift gears here a little bit. I'm very interested in archaeology. I watch a lot of YouTube videos on it, and there seems to be a lot of questions around the Exodus and where Mount Sinai is. Mm-hmm. There seems to be two major stories. I was wondering what your opinion was.
Yeah, a Jewish scholar, it's been a while since I read the book. He identifies somewhere between 15, 20 or more Mount Sinai candidates in the Sinai Peninsula. Of course, Ron Wyatt, our famous Ron Wyatt, claimed that Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabia across the Red Sea. I don't know if we want to go into that story right now. We have been there to that area. We don't think that's the place, even though there is no doubt that there was some carvings of calves, cows on rocks, but that's all over the place. That doesn't really necessarily tie to Moses or anything like that. So Mount Sinai, I don't know of any conclusive argument for basically any of the sites, but the traditional site probably has the most going for it. That's St. Catherine's in Jebel Musa, which is in the southern part. It's very remote. It would make sense that Moses would go there to avoid the Egyptian armies. It's hidden. You could accommodate a lot of Israelites on the plain before that mountain. So for me right now, my working hypothesis is that the traditional mountain, Jebel Musa and St. Catherine's, is the best candidate. I've been up those mountains many times, but what kind of archaeological evidence would you look for? In the big plain where the Israelites might have encamped, things don't survive very long. They've done studies like when a Bedouin tribe will come in, maybe thousands and thousands of people. They'll live in a valley in the desert. They have their tents, they have all their food, their implements and all of that, and they'll live there maybe for weeks. and then decide to move on. You come back a few weeks after these thousands of people have pitched their tents and left, you don't see anything. So the idea that Israelites from 3,000 years ago or more, 3,500, 1450 BC, the idea that you'd find anything from the Israelites would kind of be difficult. And people have looked, we haven't seen any definite proof. I think that the spatial geographic argument is pretty good, but it's not 100%. So maybe someday we'll find more evidence. And probably we need to look for textual evidence, like some passing tribe, Midianites or somebody makes reference to this big group of people. That would be very compelling. But so far we haven't found that. By the way, I should add this little thing I often do. There was a scholar, Edmund Yamauchi, Japanese American, who was looking at, he believes in the Bible, he's a strong Christian, and he did a calculation of how much archaeologists have found in the last 100 years. Now, this was done about 30 years ago, but after more than 100 years of scientific excavation, all the tells, all the archaeological sites in Iraq, in Jordan, in Syria, in Turkey, in Egypt, he said after 100 years of scientific excavation, all the teams that have gone out there, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of digs through these years, we've only uncovered 1/10 of 1% of what's buried. 1/10 of 1% after 100 years. So the odds that you have missed something are pretty good. It's probably still buried. Even during the Iraqi war, we went to a meeting and we saw some Iraqi archaeologists. We try and be friends even when our countries are fighting each other. And I met with them in Jordan. The Iraqis could come to Jordan. They couldn't come to America, so the Americans went to Jordan. And they showed us the discovery of an Assyrian king that had not been found yet, full of gold, incredible stuff. He showed us the pictures. The public has never seen those things. But this was just another example of incredible discoveries that are being made. They're being made all the time, and yet it's still a small amount of material that's still hidden under the ground. My own feeling is when God feels it's right that a certain thing be discovered, then he'll open the doors, open the way, and we'll find these great things. I have a feeling just before the end of time that we're going to see some incredible discoveries that will help put some questions people have to the side. But that's just my hope. Okay, anybody else? We've been here for a while now. I'm okay if you're okay. Any other questions, or are we coming to an end? Are you ready? Is there going to be some music? Good. Okay, well, maybe it's time for that music. And thanks for your attention. Thanks for your questions. And thanks for your patience listening to me share what I love very much.